A caffeinated cottage cheese.
That's not better.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, cultists, and welcome to Occultae Veritatis podcast. I'm Misfit.
And I'm Gallifrey. By the way, this is an all Patreon recording. We do these every couple months so that our cult members can have a voice as well. Guests, would you like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Brannigan.
I'm Einstein. Hi.
Today we're talking nuclear weapons, the history of their development, a bit about their design, and things like what it's like to be inside of a nuclear explosion. But before we dive into all that radiation, we need some poison.
So, what's your poison?
I ran to get a couple things for the recording, so I'd have like calories and caffeine to do it, and I realized that I'm creating like an ungodly potion in my stomach because I am drinking a Monster Energy drink and a liter of chocolate milk. I'm pretty sure this is like how to get into indigestion. Like I think I'm following the exact recipe.
Yeah, that is a recipe for unpleasantness for sure.
You're making chocolate cottage cheese in your tummy.
Oh boy!
Why did you say those words together? That's an I like cottage cheese. I like chocolate milk, but that's one of those things where I don't want to combine them.
A caffeinated cottage cheese.
That's not better. I guess my poison. I black cherry Mike's Hard Lemonade.
Oh, nice.
I've heard Mike's Hard is better than you would expect.
Yeah, people rag on it. I feel like we had this conversation last time I was on. Yeah, people rag on it, but I really enjoy it.
I'm having some really powerful and potent pineapple juice.
Ooh.
Oh, I love pineapples.
The food that tries to digest you back.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. You're trying to denature its proteins, and it's trying to denature yours.
Symbiosis.
Yeah, for myself, I'm just having myself a nice cup of coffee because I've actually got to be to work in about 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying the chocolate milk. I'm enjoying the energy drink. For now, I'm going to say a 7 out of 10. It's doing what it needs to for me. That might lower as this combination of hell in my stomach reaches the rest of my digestive system. So we're going to see.
So you have them like both open at the same time in front of you, and you're like, oh, sip of chocolate milk, and then a minute later, and sip of energy drink?
Oh, yeah.
What flavor monster is it?
It is original with the 666 demonic symbols that YouTube tells me is on there.
Ah.
It has guarana and taurine.
I don't know what those are, but I do notice that energy drinks like to advertise that they contain those.
Shall we jump into the most devastating weapons humanity has ever devised?
Oh yeah.
Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people. Please? Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. First, you have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered. Now, you and I don't have shells to crawl into like Bert the Turtle, so we have to cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck and your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by. You may be in your schoolyard playing when the signal comes. That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast. Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time, no matter where you may be. Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. You might be eating your lunch when the flash comes. Duck and cover under the table. Then, if the explosion makes anything in the room fall down, it can't fall on you. We must know how to duck and cover in the school bus or in any other bus or streetcar. If you do not know just what to do, ask your teacher when this film is over. Discuss what you could do in different places if a bomb explodes.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
Duck and cover. Duck and cover. Duck.
I think you lead off, Misfit, with bombs versus weapons.
Basically, all nuclear bombs are nuclear weapons, but not necessarily all nuclear weapons are just bombs. Nuclear bomb is an explosive device that derives its destructive force from nuclear reactions, either fission, the nucleus of an atom splitting apart, or a combination of fission and fusion, where the atoms are combined together to release energy, producing a nuclear explosion. Those are called thermonuclear bombs. Both bomb types release large quantities of energy from relatively small amounts of matter.
How and why did we create these weapons? Surprisingly, it was innovation under the threat of warfare. So it was 1933. World War II was just awakening. The Nazis had seized power in Germany, and just a few years later they would start to invade surrounding countries to take them over. And Jewish professionals and scientists were fleeing Germany. They were smelling what was in the air. Amongst them was one Leo Szilard, the man who arguably made the atomic bomb possible. Now that's a very broad phase. Of course, Leo's work was built upon decades of research before him, which arguably started at Marie Curie all the way up to him, where he conceived of the first concept of nuclear fission, which is splitting an atom to create energy. Now, he first conceived of it in 1933, the same year that the Nazis seized power and he escaped. His theory became reality a few years later when he built a working nuclear reactor.
Where did he build it?
I'm going to double check on that, actually. Oh, he built it in Chicago. It was Chicago Pile 1.
When it was decided we go to Chicago and we started building the pile, it was a composite of wood, 4x4s, and graphite. Graphite was awful. It's very dense, it's very slippery, it's very dirty. We didn't have any uranium metal, but we had sintered uranium or uranium powder. And these were formed into sort of like hockey pucks, which were inserted in graphite. And he just dictated where these were to be placed and what the layers of graphite were to be built. And I don't know how many months we did this, but it wasn't until the end of November, getting toward December, when it was pretty clear something was going to happen. December the 2nd, We started that morning, and George Weil was down in the pit working what was called a control rod, which was a meter stick with I think it had a big slab of cadmium on top of it.
Most of the people were gathered on the balcony. Down below, George Weil was directed from the balcony. He would call down to George and say, pull the rod out to a foot. Then he'd wait a while to see how the neutron level built up. The level of neutrons would go up and then it would level off at some point. It wasn't self-sustaining because every time we did that with more fuel, the level leveled off.
It wasn't much longer. He pulled out a couple of more centimeters, and I was very antsy because, boy, that counter was just going, it just clogged. It wouldn't count that fast. Okay, zip in. I don't know where that term ever came. And George put the control rod all the way back in, and everybody cheered. The whole gallery was filled with people. I guess it was Wegener brought out a bottle of Chianti. Everybody had a little sip.
And the implications of what might follow. There were two things that might follow. Nuclear power for civilian purposes, or what was really the purpose at that time, was a nuclear weapon. And this made it virtually certain. In any case, this was a truly momentous occasion, and it was quiet. And all I've been able to kind of come up with, it was because everybody knew that it was momentous. And what's there to say?
So people saw a dark opportunity in his technology. People could see that splitting the atom could produce a massive amount of energy which could boil water to generate electricity, but it could also be used to make bombs. And Leo was getting exactly that message. He got word that the Russians and the Germans were using his concept of fission to make a bomb, or to try and make a bomb. And he wrote a letter to the President of America at the time, telling them that they needed to light a fire under their butts and build a bomb before the Germans or the Soviets do. Now, he was a big name in science, but he was a big name to other scientists. He needed somebody to sign off on that letter that appealed to the general public, that could convince a president. None other than Albert Einstein signed off on that letter, saying, hey, you guys have to build a bomb before the other guys do, or else they'll use it.
Einstein's letter to President Roosevelt from 1939. Sir, some recent work by E. Fermi and L. Szilard, which has been communicated to me in manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. Certain aspects of the situation which has arisen seem to call for watchfulness and, if necessary, quick action on the part of the administration. I believe, therefore, that it is my duty to bring to your attention the following facts and recommendations. In the course of the last 4 months, it has been made probable through the work of Joliot in France, as well as Fermi and Szilard in America, that it may be possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium, by which vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements would be generated. This new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs, and it is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of this type may thus be constructed. A single bomb of this type, carried by boat and exploding in a port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. The United States has only very poor ores of uranium in moderate quantities. There is some good ore in Canada and in former Czechoslovakia, while the most important source of uranium is the Belgian Congo. In view of this situation, you may think it desirable to have some permanent contact maintained between the administration and the group of physicists working on chain reactions in America. One possible way of achieving this might be for you to entrust the task with a person who has your confidence and who could, perhaps, serve in an unofficial capacity. His task might comprise the following. A. To approach government departments, keep them informed of the further development, and put forward recommendations for government action, giving particular attention to the problem of securing a supply of uranium ore for the United States. B. To speed up the experimental work, which is at present being carried on within the limits of the budgets of university laboratories, by providing funds, if such funds be required, through his contacts with private persons who are willing to make contributions for this cause, and perhaps also by obtaining cooperation of industrial laboratories which have necessary equipment. I understand that Germany has actually stopped the sale of uranium from the Czechoslovakian mines which she has taken over. That she should have taken such early action might perhaps be understood on the ground that the son of the German Undersecretary of State, von Weizsäcker, is attached to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, where some of the American work on uranium is now being repeated. Yours very truly, Albert Einstein.
America took this warning seriously, and they started a secret program. This project was named Manhattan Project, by the way, this big undertaking to build the bomb. They were in cahoots with France, Britain, and the other allies, and they basically tried to find the best scientists, researchers, and engineers on the planet, and they brought them to America to attempt to build this bomb. When I say build a nuke, not only did they have to solve, okay, how do we get this material in the center to go critical, and we'll explore what that means. How do we get it to go critical? Not only was that a problem they had to solve, every single part of this nuke was masterfully engineered and tested over and over again, because it wasn't one problem they had to solve, it was 1,000 engineering problems they had to solve to make this thing work correctly. It was a big work project with a race to the finish line of building a nuclear weapon.
A little bit later, after everything started picking up on developing nuclear weapons, there was talk that the Nazis were actually working on developing their own nuclear program. Most of what was uncovered about it was they were working on nuclear reactors, but considering they'd already beaten the US and the Allies in general in aircraft technology by coming out with jet aircraft well ahead of us, that gave everyone a bit of an incentive to get cooking on this one.
There was espionage going in all directions. Like, America was feeding false information to Americans to try and get this bomb built faster. Like, they lied to many people in the Manhattan Project, and they said that Germany was farther ahead than they actually were in order to motivate the engineers and scientists to work harder and solve things faster.
Have there ever been any studies that show how much the brain drain of like all the Jewish folks who were fleeing, Jewish scientists specifically, who fled Germany, how much of an effect they had?
Germany really crippled itself by scaring away a lot of not only its Jewish scientists, but any scientists that were sympathetic and just didn't want to be part of the German war effort because they saw what was happening. As the war went on, and as time went on, and as more people defected, more people died, that Germany was starving for experts on all scales, from nurses to doctors to researchers to engineers. They were running out of specialists by the end of the war. Not only were the working adult age professionals dying on the front lines as soldiers, they were also quickly disappearing on the back lines as specialists in Germany. So I think they really shot themselves in the foot by driving a lot of their talented people out of the country.
In Los Alamos, in 1943, we had the problem of assembling uranium to make an atomic bomb. Dr. von Neumann was a consultant to the laboratory and visited us about 3 times a year for a week or 2 at a time. There were 2 methods being considered. One was to shoot the parts of the bomb together by a gun, and the other method was the so-called implosion, in which you surround the bomb material by high explosive and then explode this explosive so that the metal of the bomb would assemble in a sphere. In the beginning of the Los Alamos laboratory, only the first method seemed to be possible. It was von Neumann who told us and encouraged us to try the second, and who gave us a lot of information on similar work which had been done under his supervision at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, in which shaped charges had been developed. He was very positive that an implosion could be developed, and he told us that this would have added advantages for the assembly which we had not realized. One of the advantages which we had realized was that the implosion would bring the material together much faster and therefore would prevent detonation of the weapon before full assembly. Another advantage which he pointed out was that the implosion might squeeze the material and might thereby increase the efficiency of the weapon. Even after his encouragement, however, we still found it very difficult to assemble the material by implosion. There were experiments made under the leadership of Dr. Kistiakowsky of Harvard to study the explosive method without the uranium being around. And unfortunately, they gave all sorts of irregular shapes. Well, this did not trouble von Neumann at all. He suggested to us that we use something to focus the implosion, focus in a similar way as light is focused by a lens. And this device, in fact, has been called an explosive lens. Afterwards, he designed for us some configuration of explosive lenses which actually worked and which was finally used in the assembly that we used for the first bomb in Trinity and afterwards in Nagasaki.
So the Manhattan Project started small. It started with $60,000 in 1940s funding. But by the time the Trinity test, the first successful nuclear bomb in history, was detonated, America had poured over $2.5 billion into it. That is about $21 billion today.
Jeez.
Wow.
This is a project on the level of the moon landing. At its peak, it had 140,000 employees and the best scientists, engineers, and materials America could muster. And after thousands of people working, millions of hours of labor expended, and billions spent, the United States Army detonated the first nuclear bomb in the middle of the New Mexican desert.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee, site of one of the huge secret factories producing atomic bombs. This amazing city never appeared on any map. On a 59,000-acre military reservation lived 78,000 men, women, and children, a hidden community sealed off from the outside world. For 2 years, the most distinguished scientists, engineers, and technicians, British and American, worked as a team on this fabulous enterprise. The secret city had everything on tap: schools, shops, newspapers, picture houses, and Pathy News. Oak Ridge was one of the projects on which the Allies lavished their finest scientific brains, and £500 million in hard cash. The result of this mighty communal effort was victory in an international race to unleash the fundamental energy of nature. The center of all atomic bomb research is the uranium atom. 92 electrons circle its nucleus. Blasted apart, it forms new atoms and releases colossal energy, the basic power of the universe. The first test of the atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert, the shattering overture to a new era in man's history.
We had a countdown that stopped where I was, 10 miles from point zero, at minus 30 seconds. Then silence, long time. I was sure it misfired. I was lying on the ground as instructed, looking at it, not as instructed. Heavy welding glass, And then, at the right time, although I thought it was too late, there was it was early in the morning, quite dark, a very weak amount of light. I remember clearly, in the first second, my thought was, is this all? Then I remembered I had this heavy welding glass on and gloves, so no light could enter. So when this light, maybe in 2 seconds, started to fade, I tipped my hand and looked down at the sand. And you know, it was as though you had removed the curtain and bright sunlight came in. Then I was impressed. Then I saw the brilliant flash, not looking at it, but looking at the sand next to me. And of course, you know, we all were very much aware of the point that in a few weeks, this would not be just an experiment, and some of us, including me, did have real doubts whether this should be used without first demonstrating it.
Upon seeing this explosion, J. Robert Oppenheimer was shaken to his core at the fury of what he created. He quoted Hindu scripture, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." He meant that very literally. He felt like he was a god, not in the arrogant, narcissistic way, but in the Jesus Christ, my work has been used in a way that can destroy thousands in an instant. This is a terrible power I've unleashed. Like, that was the sentiment he was saying with it.
There seem to be two great views among scientists, and no doubt would be among others if people knew about it. On the one hand, they hoped that this instrument would never be used in war, and therefore they hoped that we would not start out by using it. On the other hand, they hoped, or other people hoped, that it would put an end to this war, save countless lives, put an end to a butchery that had been going on for many years and had been marked by atrocities, concentration camps, murderous raids on cities, Rotterdam and Dresden and Tokyo itself. And that on the whole we were inclined to think that if it was needed to put an end to the war and had a chance of so doing, we thought that was the right thing to do. We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
And I'll pass it off to Misfit for how these nuclear weapons work. Just how did this Trinity test detonate?
So, if everybody remembers to the very, very far long ago episode of Case 190, where I actually hosted an episode about the Demon Core.
Well, it was a good one.
Basically, the whole purpose of how these bombs worked is on supercriticality. So once you get a certain mass of radioactive material and you have some sort of change in it, like you either add more mass, you compress that same mass, or you have some way of bouncing the radiation back into it. That's how you tip from the state of criticality, which is essentially everything is absolutely more or less stable, but something could cause it to tip one direction or the other to make it go subcritical to where it's essentially neutral, but still radioactive, versus supercritical, where the fission reactions inside of it from the neutrons popping off of the larger uranium and plutonium nucleuses. The larger uranium and plutonium nucleuses are splitting apart and releasing more of these neutrons, which then cause a chain reaction and essentially cause it to cascade and run away and release a ton of energy.
Yeah, I like to think of the fission nuclear bomb reaction like the first few snowflakes falling on top of a snow-covered mountain. And they hit other snowflakes, which hit other snowflakes, and pretty soon, by the time you're halfway down the mountain, you have an entire avalanche traveling down. A burst of neutrons that split apart atoms, and when you split an atom apart and a neutron flies off, there's a loss of mass, and that mass turns into pure energy.
Think for a second about how fire spreads. If you're to light the corner of a sheet of paper, you don't have just the same line of fire moving up the entire sheet. It spreads out until eventually it consumes everything. In this case, the neutrons essentially would be like the flames and the heat causing the rest of the material to combust. So when it comes to nuclear bombs, there are two very specific types. There's the gun type, which uses a conventional explosive, usually TNT, to force two subcritical masses into each other, adding heat and compression to try and trigger it into supercriticality.
And when I look at the diagrams of some of those gun type bombs, gun type seems to be underselling it. Some of these seem to have like fucking cannons running down the middle of them just to slam those two pieces together.
And there's also a little bit of chance of error with that. One thing that the Trinity test ran into, some of the safety they tried to take with it, is they had a large steel containment vessel that they intended to use around the bomb in case there was a fizzle. A fizzle is essentially a misfire, like the two halves don't combine correctly, and while it does tip into supercriticality, it doesn't go far enough to where it explodes in a full total reaction.
Full feels like the wrong word for something that like that. It sounds too small.
Yeah.
It's like saying a catastrophic car accident was just a little fender bender.
The guy who draws the short straw to go unfix that problem, he's not going to come out healthy, is he?
Yeah. Do you think they use nose goes to decide who has to go check on the thing?
100%.
Yeah, basically it would be about the same as what happened in the two incidences with the Demon Core, where Dalian and Slotin ended up becoming exposed to fatal amounts of radiation just because the core became supercritical for even just a fraction of a second.
So you gotta run to the nearest dentist and steal all their fucking iron bibs, and then you go down.
Teeth are overrated. You don't need them.
DNA? That doesn't sound like something I'd use.
The second type is the implosion type, which is essentially just a large mass of the nuclear material that is surrounded on all sides by shaped charges. The idea is to instead use a large piece of material and use compression to explode it into itself, increasing its density, thereby increasing the chances of a reaction, as opposed to having two pieces slamming together. This doesn't have as much risk as a fizzle because it's just one piece. You don't have to worry about the geometry of it combining. You do have to worry about the explosions all going off simultaneously, but that's a little bit easier to solve for.
What's going to happen when this chain reaction starts happening? What happens is this energy is getting released, and it gets released incredibly fast. During the Manhattan Project, the scientists invented a new time unit, a shake. The expression 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, referring to some very short period of time. A shake is 10 billionths of a second. And that's sort of the time frame for fission. Okay? So what happens is it's releasing all this energy in a pretty small ball of material. And that means that material is going to heat up, it's going to turn to gas, and it's going to start blowing itself apart. Well, if bringing the atoms closer together by crushing them and increasing their density reduces the amount you need for a critical mass, having them expand out increases the amount, and it causes the neutrons to start flying out into the surrounding countryside again, and it shuts down the chain reaction. So the key difficult part of making a nuclear bomb is figuring out, how do I get my material together into the shape that I want it to be in to get a good explosive yield out of it before it starts blowing itself apart. All right, so there are two ways people have thought of to do this, basically. One is what's called a gun-type bomb, and that is literally slamming two pieces of nuclear material together at high speed. Now, if I had, for example, 2/3 of a critical mass of highly enriched uranium in this hand, and 2/3 of a critical mass of highly enriched uranium in this hand, and I brought them together with my hands as fast as I can bring them together with my hands, that would not give me a good nuclear bomb. Why? Because that uranium would melt and turn to gas, and it would blow itself apart before I got any significant nuclear yield out of it. Everybody in this room would be dead. I'd certainly be dead. We'd have a tragic accident, but we wouldn't have many blocks of a city vaporized in a nuclear blast. So the way that a gun-type bomb works is to slam those pieces together much faster than I could do it with my hands. The bomb that obliterated the Japanese city of Hiroshima was literally a cannon that fired one piece of highly enriched uranium into another piece of highly enriched uranium. If what you have is plutonium, then what you use is an implosion-type bomb. So this is one where you are trying to crush that nuclear material down to a higher density. These are much more efficient and therefore need less nuclear material. Here we have a picture that shows the nuclear material surrounded by... Now, what you need to do in this situation is you need to detonate the explosives at exactly the same time all around this bomb, because if the explosives on this side go off first, what you'll have is not a crushed ball, but a pancake. And remember, in a pancake, the neutrons are leaking out all over the place. Okay? So what you want is a crushed ball, which means you need the explosive shock wave to be a spherical shock wave going inward. All right? So that's significantly more complex to design and build, and would be much more difficult for terrorists, although still conceivable, especially if they got knowledgeable help.
There is a third type of weapon, and this is my favorite.
Yeah, I heard about this one.
Yeah, thermonuclear bombs, aka fusion bombs. In this case, you're actually using a smaller nuclear bomb to set off a bigger nuclear bomb.
Good Lord.
So what sets off the first nuclear bomb? Is it an even smaller nuclear bomb? Is it just nuclear bombs all the way down?
When we talk about the Tsar Bomba, there is literally a third nuclear bomb. There's a first nuclear bomb that sets off a second that sets off a third.
It's like, yo, dog, I heard you like nuclear bombs, so we put a bomb inside your bomb so you can have a big explosion. Now, for what happens with a nuclear explosion, most of the nuclear bombs tended to be detonated above ground. Basically, whenever any of those explosions would happen, it would always kick up a lot of material. But at the same time, you get the most destructive force by having it exploded slightly above the ground, because that's more time for the shock wave to expand across everything and cause all the devastation that nuclear weapons are trademarked for. Virtually everything within the blast radius of the fireball is instantly incinerated. It takes around 10-ish seconds for the fireball from the explosion to reach its maximum size, and it releases a ton of energy in forms of the blast pressure, heat, radiation. The light and radiation and heat from a nuclear explosion are the first primary destructive forces. Within seconds, literally anything within that range that can catch fire will. And
including the air.
Yeah, and because of that, the radiation can also trigger an electromagnetic pulse, which would essentially kill any nearby electronics.
Yeah, so much for calling for help or radio signaling for help or using any of your electronic infrastructure to try and rescue people afterwards.
Just like a cascading effect of negative, like even if you survive, within a certain radius, you're fucked. Within another radius, you're probably fucked, maybe less in terms of damage, but your health in terms of being able to help anybody.
If anybody's ever taken a look at that one website, it's like Nuke My City or something like that.
Nuke Map by Alex Wellerstein.
Yeah, that's one.
It's also going to be in the show notes.
Was that the one where they show you the risk of you being within the radius of a bomb is, or something like that?
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah. In the next section, I'm going to talk about setting off the Trinity bomb at Town Hall and tell you about what it does to my city.
Fun.
Do the electronics get fried, or after a bit can you use them?
It basically causes an overload in the sense that the radiation induces a strong current.
So they're toast.
At least most modern electronics would be. Some of the earlier solid-state stuff that use vacuum tubes and stuff would potentially be fine because there's not a lot of smaller microcircuitry that could be easily destroyed by like a couple of millivolts of overage from what it's designed for.
Mm-hmm.
Power lines, they might be okay. Big cords with no little parts might be okay. But if you get down into little components like the control circuit on your thermometer or anything with a computer chip or anything along those lines could just split from the energy. The electricity could arc between them and literally weld lines together that shouldn't be welded together.
And start fires too.
Oh, hell yeah.
When an atomic bomb goes off, and it doesn't have to be big, it gives off the gamma rays, which hits the protons, which give off an electron. All of this happens between 5 and 500 billionths of a second. It's very fast. The electrons come down, and how's electricity? Electricity is the flow of electrons. So the atmosphere is charged, and it starts charging the whole atmosphere. So now you have your power lines coming into your house. The power lines is a large antenna. All the electrons hitting it provides a very high pulse coming into your house, normally in the thousands and hundreds of thousands of volts, not your 110, 220 like normal. And the grid itself is getting hit with millions of volts. So when you have electrical lines within the house, they also get bombarded with the same electrons, causing you to have a spike internally in your house. That's the first pulse. That's the E1. E2 follows right after that, and it comes in milliseconds, just a few thousandths of a second later. That pulse is not as high in amplitude of spike, but it is like a very strong lightning strike.
And it goes further.
And it goes further. Gets out past that. So E2 is in milliseconds, and then the E3 travels slow. And it might take 30 minutes to get to the East Coast or West Coast. That is what an EMP is. A nuclear EMP has 3 different spikes.
So from far enough away, because sound and pressure from an explosion travels much less than the speed of light, you could actually see and be exposed to the radiation, the heat, and the light well before you even hear the blast go off. You can see the bomb explode, but you're already dead, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
The intense heat and pressure from one of those creates the trademark mushroom cloud as the warm air and vaporized debris rises higher up into the atmosphere. The pressure change from the rising air pulls in fresher air from the surroundings, causing like convection currents to roll up and create that shape And if you've ever looked at some old nuclear test footage, you'd see the initial blast blowing trees outwards, and then moments later you see them whipping back in the other direction and pulling dust in along with it.
Oh yeah, not only is there an initial pressure wave of air, as soon as that explosion collapses and like the pocket of energy that the explosion put out collapses, that air pocket will be drawn back in. So yeah, not only are you blown away, sometimes you're pulled back in, and it's kind of a 1-2 punch for any standing structures to fall the fuck down.
The night of the actual explosion, or rather early in the morning, came at last. On Media Hill, where I remain, there was hot coffee, last-minute briefings, and more waiting. But it seemed no time at all before the loudspeaker warned,
H-minus 1 minute. Put on your goggles. Observers without goggles must face away from the blast.
on the silent desert, the test objects waited.
H-minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
24 hours elapsed before we were permitted to view at first hand the results of the explosion.
This is the house constructed of reinforced concrete blocks after the explosion. Although the redesigned two-story frame house was severely damaged, the structural improvements had strengthened its resistance considerably. As seen here, although basement shelters offered some degree of protection, they cannot be depended upon completely in potential blast areas. The reinforced bathroom shelter was standing intact beneath the ruins of the house, so this type also offered some degree of protection. The upper section of one unguided radio tower collapsed from the tremendous force of the blast. The guide tower was slightly twisted by a power pole which fell across one of the guy wires. The weighing and storage house was scattered across the desert, but the consumer-sized tanks were unharmed. The food and cases of canned goods were taken away for laboratory tests. Many lessons were learned from this test that affect civil defense planning. And it must be borne in mind that multi-megaton weapons would result in much greater damage over a larger area. All these factors must be considered as we plan for the survival of our homes, our families, and our nation in the nuclear age.
What happens if it's detonated underground? Can it cause earthquakes, or how does that work? Do you know?
I would imagine it could kind of cause at least localized tremors. With some of the larger experiments that have happened, there was also recordings of seismographs on different parts of the planet registering like a small tremor at the same time that explosion happened.
That makes sense, yeah.
We have a episode out named Project Cauldron, and what Project Cauldron was, no joke, Google it, a plan for Alberta, Canada to mine oil with nuclear weapons by exploding them underground, which would liquefy the oil and make it easy to suck up. That's not a joke. That was a plan in motion before it was stopped.
How could they even consider such an idea? Oh my God.
What was the time frame that occurred within? Was that when everybody was just going nuts for nuclear stuff, or?
Oh yeah, it was a 1958 proposal. I think.
Okay, so yes.
Yeah, there was a time when nuclear weapons weren't seen as this horrible generator of force and power. They were kind of seen as like, oh, these could be used as a tool. And there was lots of proposals like, hey, who wants to spend 3 months digging out a new harbor for New York? We can just build a nuke and blow that harbor up. And then, they slowly learned more about what radiation does, even small amounts of radiation over time. And yeah.
Yeah, well, in the Fallout video games, they exist in a universe where like everything, like even cars, have mini reactors in them or something like that. It just all nuclear everything.
Oh yeah, if you ever get a chance to play Fallout 76 with me, one of my favorite moves is leading a pack of ghouls around one of those cars and then shooting at its engine until it blows.
So hey, now that we've said the magic F word, So fallout, here's the fun thing about that. The closer it's detonated to the ground, the more material would also tend to be pulled up into that as well. The material that I referred to as being vaporized, there's two fundamental things in physics. There's the law of conservation of energy and law of conservation of matter, or maybe it's mass. I think it's mass. But either way, you can't necessarily fully destroy anything. You can only change it. Matter and energy can be converted from one to the other, but the total amount essentially remains the same.
Right, the law of equivalent exchange.
Kind of, yeah. So in this case, all of that material is just vaporized into very small microscopic particles or even ash. So that gets pulled in along the updrafts with the nuclear explosion. All that material is highly radioactive because it was exposed to the initial radiation, and any of the remaining nuclear material would also be mixed in with that dust as well. So over time, as that mushroom dissipates, microparticles will essentially slowly settle back down to the earth, or depending on the local weather conditions, can mix in with atmospheric moisture and fall down as a black rain of radiation.
Lovely.
That radioactive fallout can travel for many, many miles beyond the blast radius to like even hundreds of miles downwind.
There is no real limit to where this radiation may fall. A little tidbit that I learned in my research. There is an active industry of collecting sunken shipwrecks older than 1940 to collect their steel. Why? Because all steel forged after nuclear weapons started being fired is a little bit radioactive. No matter where on Earth you forge steel or metal, it's a little bit radioactive because we've put all this radiation onto the Earth and in the air. They need some like totally non-radioactive metal for very sensitive scientific and medical equipment, but no steel forge on Earth produces non-radioactive steel ever since the detonation of the first Trinity bomb. What is it like to be nuked? I wanted to find this out in a very personal way, so for this next little section, I'm going to be using my hometown in Canada, which I am in right now, Saskatoon, for this. The Trinity bomb was about 20 kilotons. I'm going to detonate it at City Hall in my city. I'm about 2.5 kilometers away from City Hall. So let me tell you what happened step by step. So everything within 700 feet of the town hall dies immediately from heat, directly inside the fireball of the nuke. The fireball itself sits at about 7,000 degrees Celsius. This isn't you getting third-degree burns. This isn't you being set on fire. You are reduced to dust and molecules in this fireball. This is honestly probably the kindest option. As Misfit described, this fireball expands faster than your nerves can react, faster than the message that you saw something can move from your eyeballs to your brain. Before you even know what's happening, you are reduced to dust.
I think if I were to have to experience nuclear war, I would definitely want just the warhead to land right in my lap so I would not have to deal with any of that.
Oh yeah, put me at ground zero. Just outside the initial fireball, so outside this 700 feet, you can still die easily of heat, as the temperatures just outside of it are about 4,000 degrees Celsius, and about 2 kilometers away they drop to about 900 degrees Celsius. This is still well within the instantly getting third-degree burns all throughout your body through every layer of skin, which, again, is a kind option, because it happens so quickly. The spread of this heat is so rapid that your nerves are destroyed before they have time to send a pain signal. Even if you don't die, these burns are relatively painless, and you're kind of burned right to the center like an overdone turkey, so you really don't have any nerves left to feel pain. To about 2 kilometers away, the fatality rate is about 100%. Now, even if you survive the burns, There is a second way a nuke can kill you, the second of three, the pressure wave.
Now for civil defense, another realistic test is held. In a two-story house on Main and Elm Streets, a Brannigan family waits, 3,500 feet from atomic destruction. They're lifeless dummies, but to the civil defense officials testing bomb shelters, they could help save lives. A second home stands a mile away. America is seeking through these drills to strengthen home front defenses, for their strength means our safety. Dozens of cars are on the streets of the ghost hamlet in Nevada. And marching to within 2 miles of the blast center, 1,500 GIs take cover in slit trenches, closer to an atomic explosion than any human being since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The blast's blinding flash silhouettes observers 7 miles away. Then its ugly mushroom cloud swirls skyward. Within an hour, the dirt-caked troops, all safe, have abandoned their foxholes and are pushing through a veil of dust as GIs pointing Geiger counters lead the way. The closest house is leveled by the blast, equal to 15,000 tons of TNT, but small as A-bombs go. The second building, 7,500 feet from the explosion, still stands. Although protected by every device known to atomic scientists, troops are unable to penetrate to the blast center for many hours because of the deadly radioactive contamination shrouding the area. Val Peterson, Civil Defense Director, warns us to prepare, for this could be your house and your window.
So everything within 1.5 kilometers of the nuke would be hit with a 20 psi pressure wave. Now, 20 psi doesn't sound like much, but when you do the math, the amount of force expended on an object is sort of terrifying. So let's take a 6-story tall office building or a 6-story tall apartment complex. If you take one of its sides, it has about 800,000 square inches. If it's within that 1.5 kilometers, it gets pushed sideways with about 16 million pounds of force.
Damn.
That's enough to easily knock down most structures man has built. How about a family home? One wall of a family home is about 50,000 square inches. It gets pushed sideways with 1 million pounds of force, much more than any bulldozer can muster. How about a vehicle? Let's say a Toyota Corolla. One side of a Toyota Corolla is about 7,500 square inches, and it's thrown like a toy with 150,000 pounds of force. It's just tossed in the wind, no problem. How about a person? Whether you're facing towards it or away from it, your front and your back have about 200 square inches. You get thrown with about 4,000 pounds of force. That's equivalent to getting tackled by 5 of the biggest guys in the NFL at once.
Or being hit by the Toyota Corolla you just mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah. So you would go flying, your house would go flying, you would go flying, your car would go flying, and all this pressure on every inch of your body would likely shear your skin off and rip the flesh from your bones. And that's just the pressure wave. You have to worry about all the stuff in the pressure wave. Not only are you being thrown and striking everything behind you, everything the pressure wave is carrying with it, which is quickly being reduced to sharp, tiny shards of glass and metal and concrete, also impact you from the front. And keep in mind that within this area is the instant third-degree burn area. So you're thrown with 4,000 pounds of force, hit with a shotgun-like debris and torn apart, and you're cooked.
Even if you were to survive that initial blast somehow, if you've got all those burns, one of the things that kills people the most who have burns is the infection afterward, because of that skin is so damaged it can't protect itself, and can't protect your inner organs. Even if you somehow survived, all that debris, you're probably getting an infection and dying shortly after.
So a little farther away with the pressure wave, where I'm at my house, about 2.5 kilometers away, it's a little better. I'm just getting 5 psi of force, 5 pounds per square inch of force. So the house I'm in is only pushed sideways with 250,000 pounds of force. My car's only pushed with 37,000 pounds of force. I only get thrown with 1,000 pounds of force. Fatalities here are still around 70%. I'm still probably going to die. My house will probably still collapse, and I'll probably be thrown along with it. And let's not forget the temperature here is still super hot. Even where I am, 2.5 kilometers away from the center of the explosion, it's about 600 degrees Celsius. That's about double the temperature of a deep fryer. So there's a 30% chance I'll make it, but I might not want to be alive after that.
Yeah.
Up to 4 kilometers away from the blast, the pressure wave drops to 1 psi. Most buildings will stay standing, cars may be pushed around a little, windows are broken, and anything under a couple hundred pounds will probably still go flying, and people will still be knocked down. It'll look like a small tornado went through the area, but most people are still alive. Most people are still alive initially. Most buildings are still standing, and the temperature has dropped to a measly 100 degrees Celsius. It's just a scalding burn all over your body. That's it.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Ironically, this is where it starts to hurt, because your nerves may survive at this area to feel the pain.
What's that in American, like 230 degrees Fahrenheit?
I think 212 is the boiling point. So about
Gotcha.
212 Fahrenheit.
Yep.
Let's say you're in this area. You survived the heat wave. You survived the pressure wave and the wave of debris. But even if you survive to this point, nukes can still get you a third way, radiation.
My mother called me and she took my hand. The moment we entered the house came tremendous flash. It's like 1,000 lightning at the same time. It was so strong. So my mother pulled me down floor and covered my body with her body. Then came tremendous explosion, and we heard many things flying over our body. Then all of a sudden, total silent. So we stood up. We saw the window and the doors and the roofs were disappeared. A tremendous destruction. My sister was feeling some oily liquid running down from her head, but we couldn't see anything because the shelter was so dark. We stayed about 10 or 15 minutes. My mother decided take us to the community shelter. So we came out into the light.
The scientists who designed the first atomic weapons did not spend much time researching the long-term health consequences of their devastating creation.
The Manhattan Project focused so much on physics and really didn't know very much about the biological effects and health effects in particular.
When I met him in 2012, radiation biophysicist Evan Duple was the associate chief of research at the Radiation Effects Research Foundation. The joint Japanese and U.S. study has been following the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for nearly 70 years.
There isn't anything comparable to this kind of study.
The work began almost immediately after the war, when President Truman ordered the creation of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission in 1946.
The scientists have recreated, through interviews and questionnaires, the locations of where each individual survivor was exposed. And so they could reconstruct by line of sight what the radiation quantities would be at different distances.
94,000 irradiated bomb survivors volunteered to become subjects. Another 26,000 who lived in other Japanese cities during the bombings but were not exposed to radiation were included as a comparison or control group.
If that survivor comes down with a cancer or a health effect today, one can go back into the freezer and perhaps find what changed in that individual that eventually ended up resulting in a cancer.
Researchers here have published hundreds of papers documenting the links between radiation and its ill health effects, primarily cancer. They've written the book that is the basis for the standards for acceptable radiation exposure. Among the findings over the years, thyroid cancer and leukemia are the first to strike. Solid cancers come 10 to 30 years later. Young people are more susceptible to developing cancer than adults, and women are more susceptible than men. Perhaps the most important, a single exposure increases cancer risk for life.
Up to 1 kilometer away from ground zero, you would be receiving about 1,000 rads per hour in radiation. Even if you somehow survive the blast without getting burned or torn apart, there would still be enough radiation in that initial blast to instantly kill you. At that level, it is lethal. If you receive 1,000 rads, if you're there for a single hour, that's a lethal amount of radiation. Hell, if you're there for half an hour, that's about a 70% chance of dying. At 1,000 rads, 100% of people are dead within 10 days. Why do people die of radiation? Well, the body is a complicated biological engine. Some parts pump blood, some parts replace dead cells, some directly support other cells, and at this level of radiation, every single system is damaged and declining. Let's pretend your body is a vehicle. This is like you getting some strong dude to take a pickaxe to every part in your car. He damages the radio, he damages the gas tank, the battery, the tires, the windshield. Every single part of your car is damaged severely with this pickaxe. It may run for a kilometer or two, but it's going to break down. Massive system collapse, every organ in your body just not working correctly until you die. So where I am, at 2.5 kilometers out, I would receive a dose of radiation that would have a 70% chance of killing me outright in 30 days or less. So within 30 days, at my distance, 70% of people are dead. If my body is a car, half of the car is damaged by that strong man with a pickaxe, and the rest is barely holding on. And a lot of times, once one of the major body systems fails, the rest will fail along with it. Up to 6 kilometers out. This is past the limits of the city I'm in, into the country. Depending on how wind patterns and landscape distribute the radioactive fallout, you would be receiving about 10 rads an hour. Say you're within this zone. You're within an area that has light damage. It just looks like a tornado went through. Maybe you got knocked over and broke your hip. Say it takes the work crews 2 days to find you and dig you out of the debris. In those 2 days, you would receive a dose of radiation that would have a 30% chance of killing you. It would have a very good chance of ending your life early. Depending on a lot of factors, including how high the bomb was upon detonation, the wind patterns, there would still be radiation from about 10 to 200 kilometers out, and you would receive about 1 rad per hour. This doesn't sound like much, where 1,000 rad is considered generally 100% fatal, but with enough time, it becomes fatal. You may be motivated to stay there. There's no obvious damage in this area often. No buildings are knocked down. Sometimes glass isn't even broken. After 41 days, at 1 rad per hour, you get enough radiation to receive a fatal dose and die early. This is different from how you died initially, where your cells all fail right away. Once again, imagine that your body is a car. Maybe some of your systems are damaged a little bit, but your car can keep on running. Now, imagine that every mechanic on Earth, everybody that knows how to fix a car, suddenly forgets that knowledge. All replacement parts suddenly disappear. Your body may run for a long time. Your car may run for a long time, but initially, something is going to break down, and your body has forgotten how to repair it because its DNA is damaged. The DNA is the blueprint of the body. It's how the body knows how to build and repair things. And that low dose of radiation over time often damages that DNA enough where your body forgets how to fix itself. And soon one of your major systems collapses and the rest of your body goes with it. Sometimes in the form of cancer, sometimes just in the form of organ failure. And that's how a low dose of radiation kills you over time. Up to theoretical hundreds of kilometers out, you die slowly over time. With enough decades, you may get cancer or organ failure.
Who described what it would be like if the Trinity explosion had happened in Saskatoon. So that was, in general, one of the smallest of the full-size nuclear bombs that was ever tested.
Yeah, it was 20 kilotons. The average warhead, like modern warhead today, is about 500 kilotons. So even the average modern warhead is many times greater than this relatively small bomb, and you just saw the devastation that it would do in my example.
The Trinity test site is actually a national monument here in the US. You can currently go there. There's like slightly elevated beyond background radiation just from fragments of still radioactive material in the sand. The vitrified sand from the explosion, called trinitites, is somewhat radioactive, and it is actually a federal crime to take it from the test site. But that was nearly 80 years ago, and that radiation can still be detected. The monument, erected right over where the actual explosion happened, is still fairly highly radioactive, but you can actually be nearby it for short periods of time without suffering any ill effects. Even the reality of it is like maybe 50 years ago, while it was nowhere near as radioactive as after the initial blast, it would still be so high that you wouldn't want to remain in that area for too long.
The military needed a place that was remote and isolated where scientists and engineers could come together to solve very serious technical problems related to the development of the atomic bomb. And while many scientists and engineers throughout Europe and the United States were confident that an atomic bomb could be constructed, a lot of the research was very slow and disorganized. And so General Groves thought that everybody should come together in one central location where this research could be done. Well, take a look at the building behind us. This is a reconstruction of a guard station that replicates one of the most famous photos of wartime Los Alamos. Of the 130,000 people that were working throughout the nation on the Manhattan Project, people were pretty much relegated to knowing only what they were working on. And that also applied in here in Los Alamos, because once you passed this guard station, this wasn't the only gate and this wasn't the only fence. In fact, once you got in, there were individual laboratories that were also fenced in as well that you had to go through other guard stations. Every bit of this was designed to keep things as secret as possible. You keep free exchange inside, but total secrecy outside.
So this has been Nuclear Weapons. You have learned the story of their birth, a little about how they work, some of the different types. Next episode, we're going to go straight in to the top 10 list of nuclear weapons, the top 10 most powerful nuclear explosions in human history.
If you're interested in catching more of myself, Misfit, you can find me and my wife on our podcast that we actually run together. It's called the Kind of Fruity Podcast. You can find us on kindofruity.podbean.com or just about wherever you get your podcast, or youtube.com/@kindofruity. A little bit of stuff that's going on in the news and just have conversations here and there. Last week, we actually had Pepper Coyote on as a guest to talk about socialism. Otherwise, you can find more of her on her Twitch channel, twitch.tv/BrennaMSM.
As one of the leaders of this cult, I order you to check out their shit. So follow my cultly orders, because we all know that my power is absolute. Yeah, go do that.
Compelled to do the thing.
Yeah, compel. I don't know how high on the D20 I rolled that, but I'm gonna get high-ish. Until next time, I've been Ud Gallifrey. Presenting this topic with me, I have my guest co-host.
I'm Misfit.
And our guest this episode.
I've been Brannigan.
And I'm Isis.
Alrighty, see you next time, and behave yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So you may have noticed we never directly addressed the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. It's because after this top 10 list that's coming up next episode, the next time we touch on nuclear weapons, I think will be an episode on those bombings in particular. both the day in question, the justifications of all the people involved, the devastation that the event wrought on Japan, and the big question, should we have dropped the bomb? Did we need to drop the bomb? Going through all that will be more than enough for an episode on its own, so we will cover that in the nearish future. As a little foreshadowing to the next episode, here is a street interview conducted with Americans in 1961. They are being asked about their reaction to the largest bomb in human history that was ever detonated. See you next episode for more information about that. And see you in the after show.
Well, I'm afraid it would be very dangerous to the civilization if it comes in this area.
Of course, I don't have the idea. Big bomb. I know that testing has to be done, I guess, and as long as it doesn't lead to war, I don't have too much of an opinion.
Do you have any particular fear of fallout from these bombs?
Actually, I hadn't thought too much about it. I'm sure that our government would keep us in touch if an immediate fear were here.
Do you think we ought to keep testing the bombs here in this country?
Yes, I think so.
As long as they're doing it?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you very much, sir.
Personally, I don't see why they're doing it. I think they're doing it just to get the United States, but I don't like it.
Do you think we ought to go ahead and test bombs of this kind?
No, I don't.
There's not too much we can do about it from a human standpoint. We've tried to persuade them not to drop the bomb, but...
What is your main concern? Is it the fallout?
Primarily the fallout, sure.
Well, I tell you, at my age, I don't worry personally about fallout so much, but I think that it's terrible that the young people has to have that to live with, because it's dangerous and it's taking the chance away from them to live up and be normal human beings. Thank you.
Fear of fallout from these bombs?
Actually, I hadn't thought too much about it. I'm sure that our government would keep us in touch if an immediate fear were here.
Do you think we ought to keep testing the bombs here in this country?
Yes, I think so.
As long as they're doing it?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you very much, sir.
Personally, I don't see why they're doing it. I think they're doing it just to get the United States, but I don't like it.
Do you think we ought to go ahead and test bombs of this kind?
No, I don't.
There's not too much we can do about it from a human standpoint. We've tried to persuade them not to drop the bomb, but...
What is your main concern? Is it the fallout?
Primarily the fallout, sure.
Well, I tell you, at my age, I don't worry personally about fallout so much, but I think that it's terrible that the young people has to have that to live with, because it's dangerous and it's taking the chance away from them to live up and be normal human beings. Thank you.
Let's start 2023 with some prayers to our goddess Val. From patron and cult member Lee. Hail Valhalla. Through her, great works are accomplished. May her spirit bring us peace. Hail our living goddess. Hail Val. Please, dear goddess, help me obtain one gumball and a pony. As tithings, I offer your hound, a very good dog who is a good dog. You are so cute, so beautiful, so smart. Yes, I think the goddess appreciates the praise, and I know her hellhound loves to be called a good dog who is so cute, because it's true, right down to the dog's cute little pumpkin head. Goddess Val, if you find it within your wisdom, give Lee his gumball and pony, pretty please. From patron Susie Q. O great and holy Valhalla, please influence my feral potato's greed for Gushi and Churu, so that she may continue to get her needed medication as long as she needs it. And please clear my mind so I may remember to give it to her consistently. Hail Val. Oh Val, please give this pup the gift of greed so that it may continue taking its medication. May this pup take its medication on a consistent basis and grow healthy because of it. And from me, the production team, and the hosts, I think 2023 is going to be a good year for OVPOD. We're going to continue to push forward, try a few new things, welcome some new voices, patron episodes as you've already heard us experimenting with, and guest recordings from people around the world. The amount of people telling stories is going to grow, and hopefully we will keep you all entertained if Val wills it. Have a good January, cult members, and I'll see you on the Cult-Only Discord. If you would like to join the cult and support us for the entertainment we provide, patreon.com/OVPOD. See you next week for the biggest bombs humanity has ever devised.